Welcome back, PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and look at this. I've got the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. I'm going to play with it here in Arizona. Okay, so Canon has flown Jaron, Jordan, and myself down here to Phoenix, Arizona, put us up in a nice hotel for a couple days, and they've set up this event for us to test the EOS R1 and the EOS R5 Mark II. But as usual, although we appreciate these trips, it's not going to influence our opinions in any way. So we are actually at the Arizona Athletic Grounds to shoot some soccer and some basketball with the R5 Mark II. I'm going to test it as much as I can, but I do want to say this is still a pre-production camera, early firmware, okay? So if you're wondering why we're not doing like a full look at these cameras, like an early impressions review, the fact of the matter is we have limited time with both cameras, just the one day to shoot two cameras and evaluate them. So instead of doing sort of a first impressions review, what we're going to look at is the 5 things we think are most interesting about the R5 Mark II that you guys are going to want to know. We're going to focus on that, and then also check out the PetaPixel podcast because we're going to do more of a full spec rundown on the podcast on both these cameras. Okay guys, so the first thing that I'm really excited about on the R5 Mark II is the brand new 45 megapixel stacked sensor. The original R5 always gave tons of detail with its 45 megapixel sensor, but now that we have a stacked sensor, we're getting a lot of benefits here. So for shooting sports like this, first thing I'm noticing, I can now burst up to 30 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. Mechanical shutter is still 12 frames per second, but most importantly, the readout speed is much faster. So from our testing, we're getting roughly, anywhere between 1/25 to 1/60 of a second. They're not giving us the exact numbers, but that's pretty respectable. That means that rolling shutter is still fairly well controlled when shooting the electronic shutter. I can shoot nice fast burst rates if I want to, and also for video, this is going to have some really nice improvements, which we'll talk about. Now, when you look at the price of the R5 Mark II, this is obviously aimed at competing with the Nikon Z8, which has been a wildly successful camera for good reason. This sensor does give us very similar resolution. It's not quite giving us the same readout speed though on the sensor, so we are still having a mechanical shutter when we need it, but I do want to point out that we're not really losing much DR going to electronic shutter here because it's still doing 14-bit RAWs in electronic shutter mode, and that is a fantastic feature to have. So the next category that I want to talk about with the R5 Mark II actually really has to do with what is borrowed from the R1 flagship camera, because there's a lot. So first off, we are getting the same IBIS unit in both bodies. This is now promising 8.5 stops of stabilization in the center, 7.5 in the peripheries. Let's just call it 8 overall. That's pretty par for the course for high-end cameras now. The other benefits this has, because the electronic shutter mode is so fast, we can now shoot pre-continuous burst mode. I mean, we've seen this in other camera brands, but I'm actually finding it quite useful here to just pre-burst, and then when I see the shot, hit my shutter, and I know I've captured a half a second before my actual burst rate. You get some digital benefits like the option to up-res JPEGs 4 times, in this particular case from 45 megapixels up to 179 megapixels. It also unlocks their AI-based deep learning noise reduction that you can apply to JPEGs as well. Now, the R5 Mark II has a 5.76 million dot EVF. We've seen a very similar rating in the original R5, but this borrows now eye control autofocus that can be calibrated through that EVF. And this works exactly like the R3 or the R1. I can calibrate my eye, then wherever I look, that can be where my focusing point goes. I liked it on the R3, and it's working equally well for me here. But this does actually have a very interesting capability. Because it's now a stacked chip, it's also got the latest algorithms for autofocus and subject detection modes that we have from the flagship camera. This is a better autofocusing camera than the R3, and that has serious ramifications for anybody looking to buy an R3 now. Okay, so number 3 thing on the R5 Mark II that I'm excited about, we have a brand new battery. Same form factor, this is an LPE6P. I've been told they actually named it after PetaPixel. That's a really nice honor, so thanks to Canon for doing that. So this actually has basically the same capacity that we've seen with the other cameras. We're not getting more battery life, but we are getting more juice to power things like 8K video recording. So on the R5 Mark II, I've been told that you can use older batteries, the older LPE6s, the LPE6N, but you will lose 8K video recording. And I've also been told that if you have older Canon cameras that also use LPE6 batteries, there will be firmware updates to allow you to use the LPE6P from your brand new R5 Mark II. Okay, so we're now wrapping up here at the Arizona Athletic Grounds. I've talked about the stuff that I like on the R5 Mark II, and now let's hear from Jordan, see what he likes when it comes to video.
All right, Jordan here to proclaim that one thing I love about the R5 Mark II is that it's actually a great video camera. That faster readout is going to give us a lot less rolling shutter when we've got fast action or flickering lights, but also importantly, it gives us a little bit more DR, which means we get the Canon C-Log 2 profile, my absolute favorite of Canon's log profiles. Just more dynamic range in this, and I find it handles really saturated colors quite a bit better than the older C-Log and C-Log 3. And in a lot of ways, the R5 Mark II might actually be a better video camera than the R1 because this gives you waveforms, my absolute favorite way to expose an image. Now, it only works with the waveforms in one place on the screen. I really wish I could move that around, but you know, I'm not going to complain. I'm thrilled that we've got it. Now, Sony is the only major manufacturer not offering waveforms. Sony, you're on notice. The other nice thing is we do have a tally lamp, so I can see that Chris is recording me right now. Look at that little red light. Another weird and fascinating thing about the R5 II is this is the first camera I've ever seen where there's 3 optional grips available for it. You can get a traditional battery grip that takes 2 batteries and gives you vertical controls, or you can get the Ethernet grip, which will just let you hardwire in for super fast connection if you're like at a sporting event or something like that. Again, that gives you those vertical controls, or you can throw those vertical controls away and get a fan for long record time. I think this makes sense. You're generally going to be shooting horizontally when you're recording video. Now, the one thing I know everyone wants to hear about is overheating, because that's one of the real issues we had at launch with the R5, but it's just too early to test that. So stay tuned for our full review where we'll get into this in a lot more detail.
See, the original Canon R5 was one of my favorite cameras of all time. I just thought that it handled great, and I'm happy to see that the R5 Mark II carries on that same tradition. It's also quite impressive how much technology from the R1 finds its way into this body. So this all makes the R5 Mark II a very powerful autofocusing camera with fast burst rates. I was impressed by the electronic shutter on this sensor. And you know, this really gives this camera a mass market appeal for not only landscape and portraiture studio work, but also some sports, wildlife, and journalism, and that really gives it broad appeal. Unfortunately though, with the limited time that we actually had to have our hands on this camera and test it out, and the scope of what we were testing out, autofocus and handling is pretty much all that we could test. The autofocus performance here is very good. I still feel like the R1 does a better job, gives you a little bit more confidence when you're trying to get that shot, but I think a lot of people are going to have good success with this camera. I think it's also telling that Jordan shot both the episodes, the R1 and the R5 Mark II episodes, on the R5 Mark II, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, better tools like waveform. He liked the fact that high-resolution video was compressed, not having to resort to RAW like you have to on the R1, and so this really does prove itself to be a more affordable and also maybe more effective hybrid photo video platform. And so as much as we enjoyed getting a first look at the Canon R1 and the fact that it is a very prestigious flagship camera launch, can't help but feel like the R5 Mark II is maybe the more compelling overall product. Not so the fact that it has more market appeal to more kinds of photographers, but also just that, you know, if you are a Canon shooter, this makes a lot of sense for most people to use. It just feels more versatile. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and our very early look at the R5 Mark II. As I said earlier, do check out the PetaPixel podcast. You can watch it on this exact same channel or all your favorite podcasting apps. Just search for PetaPixel podcast, because we're going to be talking a lot more about the specs and our overall findings and our experience with these cameras in that podcast as well. You don't want to miss it. And hey, if you guys want to show us a little bit of love and support, definitely check out the merch store. Just go to store.petapixel.com and you can rock shirts and look as cool as Jordan and I on our photo shoots. We would really appreciate that. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.